This is not thing.
Hi everybody, hopefully you can hear me. Welcome to today's session on inclusive facility design and innovation. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Karen Jones and I'm the Chief Executive for the Office of Sport. I'm incredibly excited to be the host of the second forum today, which is actually part of the Inclusive Facility Design and Innovation seminar series. Today we have a virtual audience. I was originally told of around 200, but I've actually been just updated with about 370 plus people registering. And that includes people from international and interstate, as well as professionals and guests, representatives from all tiers of government and consultants and participants from our diverse and ever important sport and recreation sector. Look, today we have three fantastic presenters working in the field of architecture and design, and they're all leaders in their field. So personally, myself and on behalf of the Office of Sport, I do welcome Belinda, Barnaby and Dion to the first part of today's forum. Following the design team, we will then be hearing from Turkin and Sarah, who are both passionate and about genuine community participatory engagement and creating positive change through people-led solutions. First though, and an incredibly important part of how we start all of these is our welcome to country. And for myself, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the many lands upon which we are all gathered today and recognise their continued connection to the land and waters of their country. I would also like to pay respect to our Aboriginal elders, both past, present, and of course also emerging, and also pay those respects to any First Nations people who are joining us today. Before we make a start, I also want to acknowledge all those that have been impacted by the flood and storm devastation and convey my thoughts to those that have been personally impacted. I would also like to thank and recognise all the people who are lending a hand, including our many sport and recreation clubs and also associations who are supporting not only their members, but also many of their local small business sponsors that have been impacted. Now, just some quick notes. By registering for this online forum, you have acknowledged that you know that the session will be recorded and given your consent to do so, and that you are also consenting to the recording being made publicly available on the Office of Sport's website. If you do have any questions throughout today's session for the presenters, then please pop them into the Q&A chat and we will endeavour to answer as many of those questions as possible during the panel sessions. Now, the Office of Sport, the Office with support from the presenters will respond to any unanswered questions in a follow-up information sheet that will be distributed to all participants with the forum recording link. These will also be updated to the Office of Sport website as well, so please keep an eye out for that. I also just would like to advise everybody that if you do want a more accessible and inclusive experience today, then please, if you have a look at your Microsoft Teams, you will see three little dots at the top right hand of your screen called More. Feel free to go down that menu option and click on Turn on Live Captions, and you'll also get some captioning for today as well. Now, today's session is about designing thinking and will include three short presentations followed by some time for question and answers. We then bring it home with two presentations with another opportunity to ask questions of both Sarah and Turkin. However, let's start by familiarising ourselves with this simplified process model on the 5 common steps to design thinking. Today, we will unpack some of these steps through case studies and through some shared learnings and also through some tips. Today's forum explores the importance of stakeholder engagement in helping identify and solve problems. And later in the session, Turkin and Sarah will explore the importance of including diverse stakeholder needs and listening to solutions. It is fitting that the forum date aligned with Harmony Week this week, And today's presentations are thought-provoking and encourage all of us to think about how important it is to respect, to appreciate, and more importantly, to celebrate our diversity. Through diverse stakeholder consultation, we also have the opportunity to learn, to innovate, and to deliver positive outcomes for all of our communities. Through the New South Wales Government infrastructure funding programs, we want to deliver inclusive and accessible facilities that feel safe and welcoming for all community members. And we hope the forum series will support the audience in their future facility designs and stakeholder engagement strategies. That's enough from me. So let's hand over to our first presenter. And our first presenter is Belinda Go, a principal architect at Populous. Belinda has a particular interest in the creation of quality architecture that is responsive to the human experience and thrives on the challenge to create socially, environmentally and economically sustainable design outcomes for cities and communities. With over 20 years experience, Belinda has worked on major projects at home and abroad, including the post-Olympic AFL conversion of a core stadium, previously known as Stadium Australia, the Arsenal's Emirates Stadium, the Olympics 2012 Olympics, and the ICC Sydney at Darling Harbour. Her skills and experience in sport and entertainment facilities and precincts are now focused on a new community sports and recreation facility in northern New South Wales, Football Victoria State Football Centre, and also the home of Matildas at La Trobe University, and an indoor multi-sport facility and National Basketball League training facility in Tasmania. Designing for Women is a key focus of the Office of Sport through our Women in Sport strategy, Her Sport, Her Way. And I look forward to your presentation, Belinda. So over to you.
Thanks very much for the introduction. I would like to acknowledge the Wulgoga people, the traditional custodians of the land at which I'm meeting on today, and pay my respects to both elders past, present and emerging, as they hold the memories, traditions and culture of this land. Go to the next slide. So today I really want to focus in on the importance of really effective and authentic community engagement. We really need to understand who our users are and how our users will interact with what it is that we're designing. And we also really need to understand how they'll share those facilities and really engage in those facilities to fully utilise them as an investment, both socially and economically and environmentally in the places we put them. I'd also really like to stress the importance of universal design in our approach to what we do as designers, and really in creating really great design, we really need to be thinking about the equitable opportunities and access that we provide to everyone who uses the buildings that we create. With 18% or 4 million people in Australia with some sort of disability, physical, mental or behavioural, it's super important that we understand that disability is really diverse and that we really need to understand that there are different requirements for all users. There's also an importance that we really need to place on inclusive design, and inclusive design meaning that we listen and we understand the perspectives of all of our users and find ways to connect, co-design and co-create the places that we design. And importantly, we also really need to understand that we need to celebrate diversity, but in celebrating diversity, we are very much about creating and connecting communities and acknowledging and respecting each other, our diversity and all the things that bring us together, but also create belonging in the places that we create. Go to the next slide. So as Populous, we obviously design the very large sports facilities, but we also have a very strong focus around the elite and how the elite facilities actually integrate community assets as well. So we're currently designing around 16 of the last 25 high performance facilities in Australia, but many of those facilities are really looking at ways to integrate community and grassroots facilities within those projects. Two examples that I'd just like to highlight is that we have worked on both the West Coast Eagles training centre over in Perth, but we've also worked on the Rugby Australia facilities. And both of those facilities have really brought to the forefront how women's elite sport has really transposed into those facilities, but also around how community engagement is integrated within those facilities at all levels. From thinking about pathway programs and also around other uses that create greater community connection and usage, from tertiary institutions through to community group areas and organisations. We're also currently designing the Brisbane Lions facility up here in Brisbane, where I am today, and also we're doing the the Football Victoria State Football Centre down at La Trobe University, as mentioned earlier. And those facilities are also really pushing the bar up around the elite women's sports facilities, but also considering the pathways and the transparency to pathways for women to really participate, spectate, and have a career in sport. Next slide. Sorry, excuse me. Within Populous around, I think it was around 6 or 7 years ago, I have been leading a design approach within the company, which has very much been focused around wise design. And wise design started as an impetus around the acceleration of what was going on for international and both national women's sport at the time professionally. But where it's really gone from there is really integrated into our overall design approach. So that approach has definitely matured in the last few years, and it's really moving towards a bigger and broader understanding around how we can be more inclusive, equitable, and universal in our approach to design. So some of the pillars here that I talk to are really around development, and development in a way where we are actually providing pathways to participation, and also around growing fans that are female based. Also considering the bigger picture around universal access and really going beyond DDA and actually really considering that there is a proportion of the population that really need access to everything. And if we're looking to be inclusive, we really are about providing those things. Human dignity, and human dignity in the sense that we are really providing adequacy for every user from the point of view of privacy, of cultural difference, and in a way where we've basically make them feel included, that they will be part of the space and want to use the space. And then equitable in terms of really giving the access to sport and giving access to everything that creates community. We also want to be able to create a sense of belonging and actually a way in which people can connect and want to connect and feel part of the bigger picture within communities. And also, as everyone understands, sustainability is quite key to how we think about all those things. From a social, economic, and environmental standpoint, we want to be building facilities that are sustainably used into the future. Next slide. So I'd like to talk really to my first case study here, is just really around the current project which we're building on the Mid-North Coast for Wulgoga. It's the Wulgoga Sports Complex. Key to our understanding about how we approached this project was really quite key to give us an understanding around the bigger, broader picture of the context, the people in place. So this facility is a multi-use, multi-sport facility, and it's a much awaited asset of this community for over 10 years. So we commenced this project during the thick of COVID. We had a moment where we were all able to get up to Wulgoga to actually start our briefing process. That briefing process obviously was challenged by what COVID offered, and I suppose that in talking to that process, the first point I'd like to make around it was that we really needed to gain a deeper and greater understanding of the why for the project. So that involved actually really digging in and actually building rapport with the community, engaging at every level that we could around their understandings for the multi-use nature of this facility. It was really key to have a great understanding and to listen to the community. So we did, fortunately, in this process, have a moment at the beginning of the project where we actually got to do FaceTime with the community. And then we had to move into a mode where we worked both hybrid, online, and then in person. But key to that process was really doing deep learning and understanding of the community and what those needs were. If you go to the next slide. So understanding the client and the stakeholder groups was really super key to this project, because this project had sort of multiple layers and levels of usage. So our key client for the project was the Coffs Harbour City Council. They obviously had achieved funding for this project, so there were a lot of hoops they had to jump through to actually pull the funds together from a federal and state funding perspective. But they had long awaited this project because it had been in discussion for many, many, many years. We started the process by really digging deep into what was an understanding of the needs. And then we did a series of engagements with the local Gambania people. We actually consulted with the elders, and we learnt the story of the land. We learnt what that meant to the people of the region. We also engaged with a Arts Alliance team, which actually went to an EOI process, and we worked with artists to integrate the story of the land within the project. We consulted obviously with sporting groups, and we understood all the various sport requirements, and they were all very strongly based around state, regional and community use. And then we went further into talking to the youth around understanding the local high school, which was across the road from the site, and how the users might choose to engage and hang out there after school. We also, for Wulgoga, is the largest Sikh population outside of India is in Australia, in Wulgoga. So it was very important to understand the Sikh culture and how we would integrate and understand their needs, because they would effectively be using this venue as a events venue, event for weddings and large sporting events, etc. And then also there was the performing arts team and groups that really wanted this facility as a multi-use performing arts centre. We also had further community consultation around working with club groups, etc., and the Chamber of Commerce within Coffs Harbour. So as you can see, there were many, many, many stakeholders. But key was actually engaging with each of them individually and really understanding their needs and working with the client in each of those environments to understand what they were doing. Next slide. So key to actually doing great engagement is really integrating it with the design process. So all the way through this process, we engaged, we consulted, we communicated, and it was done at every single stage of the project. Basically, through establishment, we worked out what the brief requirements were, we explored, and we innovated, and we shared, and we communicated. And this process was integral to really ensuring that the messaging for all of our stakeholders was clear. They understood where we were in the design process and where we were in terms of decision making. And the client was key in that involvement as well, to really push and communicate to the communities and every stakeholder group around the process that we were going through and where we were in the process, and really seeking to get feedback at every stage and communicate where we were, where the vision of the project would lie for each of the stakeholders. Next slide. So on Wulgoga, we basically really pushed the idea of really understanding what was bringing the community together. And part of the story of the land actually drove some of that design thinking. The site itself, from the elders' perspective, was a learning site. It was a site in which the youth would migrate from the coastal beach areas into the hinterlands. They would learn how to make and to cook and to learn the skills they needed to live on the land. And the story of that actually grew into how we would create a place which was a place of gathering and a place of learning and about a community. And I think there's a really lovely synergy with what the story of the land is and the way we landed on this project, and this project being all about gathering and enjoyment in gathering. So some of those things that worked through in terms of the design that really delivered on inclusivity was really around being a design for all genders and considering gender neutrality as key to every facility within the building. It was also about providing depth in the access to spaces and connection with the events going on in space. So our client was very enthusiastic at every level to have inclusion within the design. So we have a changing facility within the building, an adult changing facility, as well as a sensory room. So these things probably at this scale would not normally be considered, but our client was very clear that they wanted this building for everyone. We also, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, really talked very strongly to the Indigenous language and integrated that into the approach to the architecture and the artwork, which was also commissioned as part of the project. Accessible seating, accessible changing areas and locker rooms were all key to how we considered creating a barrier-free access to everything on the facility. And we also took strong environmental cues and connection with country to really drive the design. And flexibility was optimal. Next slide. Wulgoga was very much about creating flexibility for the future. The facility itself is multi-sport, but also very strongly linked to recreation at every level for the community. It also provides spaces for performance and includes a stage within the multi-purpose sports hall. And it also was going very much a precinct design for large events. Things like the Sikh Games and other things that the Sikh community were definitely looking to host as soon as the venue's completed next year. We also obviously had a fully indoor and outdoor facility. So it was AFL cricket provisions predominantly externally, but also a multi-sport indoor court facility with associated, obviously, performance spaces and stage. And very much seen as an intergenerational facility with multi-purpose spaces and rooms for all sorts of cultural and recreational activities, both internal and external. It was a place designed for everyone. Next slide. The other really key things to the way we approached Wulgoga was very much around cultural and diversity awareness, obviously, as I've spoken to, around designing for country and really engagement with those traditional owners, looking at the story of the land and how that plays out for the design and co-creation and co-design through the process of the design. Also really working strongly around understandings of the Sikh culture and how they would choose to use the building and understand the usage of the building and embellish parts of their culture within how the spaces were designed. And then considerations for universal design, as discussed earlier, around real access to every space within the building. Next slide. And then the final case study I'd just really like to talk about is Matilda's. I'm just going to touch very high level on the ideas for this project. This project's very exciting in terms of really raising the bar for what women's sport professionally can be for football in Australia, but very much we're embellishing the sort of four key principles here for the project around football for all, around world-class facilities, about connecting with community, and about gender equity. And those things we all see as drivers for change, and drivers for change for real inclusive design. Next slide. And then finally, just some glimpses of what's going on with Matilda's, but effectively we really are looking at designing and building equity in what we're doing. So really designing access and transparency to elite sports and really delivering on flexible, dedicated player facilities that really provide a belonging for women in sport and pathways for them to go further. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Melinda, and your passion for architecture and your experience absolutely shines through, and thank you so much for that passion and for sharing your experience today. I think what we can also take out of today is also your inclusive approach not just for our Indigenous and multicultural communities, but also for women and girls. So thank you very much for your time this morning. Now on to our second presenter, and our second presenter today is Barnaby Hartford Davis from Cox Architects. Barnaby is an experienced registered architect and associate with experience in a range of sectors, including education, health, sports, commercial, residential, hospitality and justice for both private and public sector clients. Barnaby is a design leader working from the concept design through to completion. He's also an excellent communicator with a really well-rounded understanding of the life cycle of complex projects. Barnaby is skilled in leading large teams, project coordination, stakeholder engagement, and also client management. Barnaby is articulate, I should say, is personable and an efficient project leader. So we're very honoured to have Barnaby join us today. And Barnaby, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Karen. I really should tone it down in the bios next time, I think, because this presentation is not really about me. I think it's about the facility and for all of you in the audience to just to get a sense for how we do things and what kind of outcomes you can expect to achieve out of the process. I'd just like to start by making my own small acknowledgement of country. I come to you from the land of the Wulgoga people of the Eora Nation in what is currently known as Lilyfield in Sydney. I'd like to also pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that it always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Look, the purpose of my presentation today is to give you a bit of a worked example. So more of a case study focus. I'm really grateful that Belinda went first because you can see just how complex stakeholder engagement can be from her presentation, and also glad for those two worked examples that she gave. What I'd like to focus on, however, in this presentation is more of a sort of episodic presentation. So just showing you how we came across design issues, what the solutions that we found were, and in particular, the communication tools that we used to communicate back to our stakeholders. The learning objectives for today, obviously, is a worked case study example within the New South Wales government context. A local regional level facility. It has elements of elite facility status, but really is a community asset. And there are three key learning objectives that I want to get out of today. The first is to look at what the benefits of stakeholder consultation have been for our project and how we've incorporated feedback along the way. What measures that we use to incorporate that feedback as the second point. And the third is just how we've balanced the idea of it being a fit for purpose facility, some of the issues around universal design and multi-sport, and then also something that we can deliver on time, on budget, that will be of benefit to the community more generally. Again, before I get into the detail of the slides, we are the project stage. Our project team, comprising just an army of experienced human beings across all sectors, project management, internal people from our building authority, which unusually in this case is school infrastructure, not the Office of Sport, but we're providing regular updates back to our kind of anchor stakeholder group. There was recently, I think in the last week, a hosted community information session just to provide some feedback on where we're at, and you can find links to that. I believe the people that have helped put this presentation together might put them at the end or in a series of resources, but you can just search for the West Ryde Multi-Sports Facility. Google will help you on that front. Our project has gone to tender. The tenders have closed and they're being assessed at the moment. So we're in that very tense period where we don't know whether it's going to be too expensive or whether COVID has, stuffed our opportunity to get a building in on budget, but obviously working together with everybody in the process. Next slide, please. This is just a little, you can search our website if you want to see more of our experience. I just wanted to demonstrate from this slide, a bit like Belinda, that we work on a pretty large range of sports projects, from small community projects like the one I'm about to show you, or relatively small, it's still a massive site, all the way up to the scale of the Sydney Football Stadium, which is, as you all know, currently under construction. We've done a series of centres of excellence as well along the way. So just where we sit in that spectrum from community sport to elite sport and professional sport is important to understand. Next slide, please. So I've debranded who our community organisation is, which should make it a little bit exciting, and you can obviously find this out online, but there's a few key quotes that came out of our consultation process that, excuse me, I wanted to share. And the first, from John Alexander, the federal member for Bennelong, is that the organisation's engagement with the local community and the positive social and health benefits that flow from that are second to none in Bennelong. So I'm sure there are other community organisations that might contest that, but you can really see from the outset that we're not just designing a sports facility, we're designing a community asset. Our stakeholders are very aware of that, and their outreach is really significant. Next slide, please. And they even said to us, again, in the briefing process, that the centre will lead itself perfectly to hosting a wide range of community, corporate and sporting functions and events. So in terms of inclusive design, you know, we need to understand that these are highly functional, multi-use facilities, and our stakeholder groups are actually really very large. But if you go to the next slide, what I've just tried to outline here is what I call the stakeholder ecosystem, and sometimes it can feel like an ecosystem. You don't quite know exactly which interest is going to rise to the top. But in this, I'll just take you through it so that you can see where some of the constraints and opportunities have come. So we obviously have at the top left, our community netball organisation. They were the original project proponent and they will be the anchor tenant. However, they are not the facility owner and they're not the asset, the people developing the asset. So sometimes those interests can be in conflict. We have our local residents who we expect will use this facility for community recreation, but also the surrounding houses, you know, who might see it as a way to, you know, improve their property value, or in particular, something that might affect their enjoyment of their properties and their houses. Because as we know, if you train late into the night on a community sports ground, it can get noisy and there's light pollution and issues like that. So they are a really critical stakeholder, even if their voice is not as active in the design process. In this case, the City of Ryde Council, our approval authority. It is a regionally significant project in scale and project budget. However, we, because this is procured as a government project, acknowledge local government as a really critical approval authority. They also represent the broader community needs. So often when we're being asked to make public domain upgrades and looking at intersections and things like that, that's because they wear that hat in that consultation process. We have our future facility operator who has commercial interests and needs to make sure that the project has a commercial viability going forward. So again, these are complex needs that need to be balanced against other needs within the project. They're also a future stakeholder. So in our process, this commercial operator was not engaged early. We had to get to a point where we could go to an open tender on that. Our asset owner and procurement lead is the Department of Education, which is an unusual one because we also have the Office of Sport as a stakeholder as well. They have their own internal constraints and technical stakeholder groups and issues like that that need to be addressed. Put broadly, we have a community asset being developed by the government for community. But the way that looks in a stakeholder ecosystem can change every time. And then obviously the Office of Sport, who are a design excellence partner and have been really instrumental in ensuring that we have an inclusive design and have led us toward various extra review processes that have been really beneficial. So next slide. There's a common theme here. Belinda had a Tangle diagram as well, but I've got here the perceived and the actual stakeholder process. It can seem at the time extremely complicated. You have multiple threads, they seem to be in knots the whole time. What I'm trying to get across in our presentation, now we saw at the top, Karen presented the 5 steps for effective consultation. We've simplified them into basically 3, and it's just a simple takeaway. It's about listening, acting, and checking. You listen to stakeholder input, all of the stakeholder input. You use the design process to ideate and to actually design those things in. Then you go back and you check. What I have found, and if we go to the next slide, we maybe just start in some of the work example. Well, I'll come back to this slide, but what I have found is that actually being very open and using very clear communication tools, you can engage people in an empathic way to understand constraints, and that sometimes compromises need to be made. So in terms of some worked examples, we were handed at the very beginning, and have referred to before, but the Netball Australia National Facilities Policy, as well as multiple assessments of viability and opportunity from external providers. In this instance, we're grateful to OTM for their content. If you go to the next slide. However, when you apply some of the other constraints, which I'll show you in a sec to the side, it's very difficult to achieve all of the needs of, from a master planning point of view, of good, an optimal court orientation in this example on the side. What we did is prepared a slide very similar to this. So we had our brief content on the left-hand side saying these are the range of opportunities for multi-sports and for netball courts in particular. Here are the courts that we think we could achieve very effectively, and here are the courts that we think are going to be in a suboptimal orientation. What do you think? And in that instance, there were no surprises, and our organisation and all of the people involved acknowledged that there were some compromises that needed to be made on that front. We use diagrams like the one in the middle, identifying runoff zones, to say, this is how it's going to work functionally, within the context of the site. You go to the next slide, please. This demonstrates, like when we first received the site, it looks fabulous. It's a several hectare site. It's the site of an old high school, so it should be fine. And in early master plan studies, it appeared it would be fine. However, as we built up, we recognised we had a bushfire zone. We had an active riparian zone with potential for Aboriginal occupation on the old creek's edge. We had an enormous detention basin, which was an unofficial detention basin, but maintained by council. So our ambition is a sporting facility, but our stakeholders and their various concerns overlaid to a point where we really impacted what we could achieve on the site. We summarised that information into the diagram on the left-hand side and presented it back and said, the shape of the site that we have now is a product of the resolution of all of those stakeholder constraints. What do you think? And obviously there was movement around the sides, but being open and sharing and finding tools that communicate those things well was really critical to success in this regard. If you go to the next slide. Again, we had a protected ecological community in the top right-hand side. So the same source of that bushfire risk was also a blue gum high forest. So really beautiful stands of established blue gum trees. We wanted, on images on the left-hand side, this broader kind of community park aspiration. So we incorporated both aspects into our design, preservation and enhancement of the public domain and community space. Next slide. And these are some of the, I'm sorry about the image quality, it looks a bit dodgy on my screen, but some of the resolution. So we're following the contours of a site. We've perched our building bench in a way that engages with the street, which is very steep, but also allows overland flow to pass through and around our site. What you can't see from this angle as well is that we're also tying in universal access. So we always have ramped access across the entirety of the site. So trying to balance all of those needs in a free-flowing park-like context was a real challenge. Next slide. On the left-hand side, we were given brief requirements about what we needed within the building as a list. What we use on the right-hand side, and this would be familiar to Dion and Belinda, is just a very simple blocking and stacking diagram to say, look, these are the functional relationships that we see working within the site and the facility. What do you think? These are really powerful tools because they cut out all the riffraff of plans and things like that some people find difficult to read. Next slide. And then we have council. So we had an initial design that was far more organic and flowed along terraces, and we had a couple of minor tree removals to achieve that. We also optimistically pitched for a lower on-site car parking proposal to encourage, and we've got close access to public transport, but to encourage alternative access and to use on-site storage, on-street storage for cars. Council naturally got back to us and said, that's not going to happen, that's not going to fly, so we have to change that, which is really a very big change for our stakeholders. So what we did is use the diagram on the right-hand side to say, look, well, both of these diagrams in tandem, here are the problems, here's how we're proposing to solve them, and here's how the facility is in effect better. And that's a key theme from this presentation, that when you get feedback and challenges are folded in, these projects improve. They do improve. Stakeholder feedback is not a challenge. It's actually a way to deliver better architecture. Next slide. I just wanted to finish. I mean, I think I've waffled on. I think it was the long bio at the beginning that killed a bit of my time. To show you a few images of our slides. So, the facility that we've ended up with really engages with the street. It's scaled in such a way that local residents are not going to feel that this actually very tall 10-metre building doesn't dominate the streetscape. So we only really have an apparent 1-storey frontage to this street. We're using an existing turnaround bay that was part of the high school site to allow drop off it. You can see that glazed entry. That's also where we've got a kind of cafeteria and enough storage for the apparently hundreds of people that queue to get a coffee on any given netball day. We've got you can see in the margins in our runoff zone, we've identified a public art opportunity for Aboriginal engagement as well as local a planting schedule that enhances local species. We have provided the most enormous amount of car parking that complies with DCP, including under the building, but we think we haven't let it dominate our reading of the site and of this being a community asset and community park. So there's a very clear pathway down almost the back of the courts, but then lift access and universal access from that lower car park zone. It also doesn't impede our flood zone. Next slide, please. This is also a climate responsive, that other great, the other two great stakeholders, gravity and the sun, but we think we've got a pretty clean architectural response that takes into account our orientation, reducing glare on the court surface on the internal courts, as well as providing sufficient daylighting during the day to minimise the need for artificial light. And I think that might be our last. Oh, there you go. And this is, you can see from the lower court layout, that little object at the corner, which is no doubt going to be used as a rebound surface, is actually our lower amenities block for the building as well. So using the building to service all of the external courts as well without having to build multiple different buildings. And I assure you we'll turn the lights on in the basement car parking, but it is an open decked car park to try and minimise the need for mechanical ventilation. Just wanted to leave in the next slide, on our final slide, interior. The next slide. This is how it works. This is how the sausage is made. We listen. We take in the first instance, and it's often as boring as this, recording individual items in a series of Excel spreadsheets to say, what was that piece of feedback that you required, and then we use those registers as communication tools back. We then act and provide a design response in the form of design reports, design presentations, which we have every month, and check. We reissue those same schedules and identify in our comments section how we've responded to each of them. And we found that, I suppose, the series of communication tools that we've just showed you, that I've just showed you, and these sorts of tools really help. That's it from me. I'm looking forward to any questions if you have at the end.
Thank you very much, Barnaby. I really do like that sense of a roadmap, if you like, that you gave us around the listen, act, check. I think it's something that we can all take out from today, particularly as we go through and we work with stakeholders around designing facilities and making sure that those designs actually do resonate not only with the users but the community in more general. So thank you for sharing your experience and for working through that example for us. It's really appreciated. Now, just a quick reminder to everybody who is attending today, please don't be shy and don't forget to put any questions that you might have for any of our panelists today. Put those questions into the chat and we will get to them after our next presenter. Speaking of our next presenter, our third presenter today is Dion. Dion is the Principal Architect and Director at 106 Architects and Third Place Thinking, who are a leading architect and thinker for sports, community leisure and also recreation facilities. Now, Dion himself is a former black stick and Olympian and New Zealand Commonwealth Games hockey silver medalist. Dion has an innate knowledge for sports and community projects and the high performance environment shaped by years of experience, and that's personal experience, both at the local and international level. Now, since retiring from hockey in 2005, Dion has successfully combined his two passions of sports and architecture by establishing 106 Architects in Australia and New Zealand. And their focus and specialty is in master planning, design, and the delivery of sports-related facilities for high performance and community groups. Now, I might be speaking for Dion now already, but I'm sure Dion believes that good design is as much about being fit for purpose, being sustainable, affordable, and accessible as it is to encourage a sense of community and social connection. So with that introduction, Dion, I now hand over to you, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts about third place thinking and also your learnings.
Beautiful. Thank you, Karen, for the introduction, and kia ora, everybody. And I'd just like to also pay my respects to the first people in New Zealand and the custodians of that land to which I was born, and also, I guess, acknowledge how fortunate I am to be here. I'm based in Melbourne today. So I just wanted to take people on a journey. We've had some fantastic case studies from Belinda and Barnaby, and this is really about trying to bring that together and present to you some old thinking and how it might be transferred or represented into how we design today. So next slide. So as we talk through a little bit of that context around where we came from, and it's particularly relevant with all of us in terms of where we come from and our learnings and our experiences and how we take that forward. I was brought up in rural South Auckland and then transferred or made a transition to a new urban development and thinking on Auckland's North Shore, two bookends of really quite different thinking. And what that's allowed me to do is to bring forward or have a window into changing community and learning environments which are ever fronting with us today. Next slide. So part of that is about looking for those opportunities, looking for some creation and how we can connect the sport, people and design. And for me, that's about where is that intersection between high performance and sport and community, and where is that connection between different communities and trying to interweave and create a thinking base, almost like Barnaby was talking about and Belinda with the wise thinking. How can we provide a narrative that people as designers can carry forward into the work that we do? Through the next slide. So the idea of third place, many of you will know that it's not a new idea. It was a concept that was developed in mid last century, really out of the dissatisfaction around suburban sprawl and suburban development in the United States. And so what is it? It's that place between home and work that we can come together and we can feel accessible, we can feel safe. It's a social place that we can occupy. If you go to the next slide. So the idea for us is around, or at least the proposition around third place thinking, is that can our community or sports and community facilities, can they be our new third place? And so the genesis of that is through, as designers, we create brief documents, we try and understand site context, we have an overlay of operations and management, council establish some strategic settings and some goals, we have a cultural overlay and also a sustainability overlay. Where I think we can start to develop that is and enhance that proposition of our facilities becoming that third place, is that we can embed a specific requirement into our briefing about this idea of third place thinking at a high level. How can we look to thread through some of the concepts that will help us establish that social centre and social piece? Next slide. So going back a little bit to my context, and I can bring that forward, but we all bring that forward and trying to understand what makes us tick and who is our community. Our community spans generations, it spans a range of different cultures, it spans experiences that we've all brought through our sports and recreation, but also our career and our educational development. And there's an underlying theme within our sports facilities that this idea of this freedom to express, our freedom to play, and what sort of input can that have onto the way that we design and create facilities. Next slide. Because the problem that we have, third place is an archaic concept. And so in challenging that thinking, we want to understand if it's still relevant. Can we redefine it in some way and overlay our histories and our traditions and bring that forward to us? And what does that mean to us? And how can that inform those decisions that we make? I think really importantly, we have functional briefs, we have a functional requirement, we have spatial allowances and schedules that we need to be able to provide to define needs and to define a project basis. But there's also the softer overlay that can occur around that emotional connection, the social and community well-being, and how that all comes together. So for me, that's a little bit about this idea of third place thinking. If you go to the next slide. The question that we ask that is so what? You know, so what about design? You know, I think it's really important that we look to re-engage or engage our fans and community, and by embedding some currency in and around the third place thinking, we're able to complement the needs and functional requirements that we have for our facilities. So I just want to explore, if you can go to the next slide, this idea then of our sports and community design is looking to be our new third place. Then what place does that, and what role does our community infrastructure in helping us to develop more resilient communities? I just want to touch on a couple of projects, if you can go to the next slide, that we had working around the earthquakes in Christchurch in February 2001. It was just before 1 o'clock in the morning, and by the images there, you can see there was this devastation, not only in and around housing, our CBD, the built infrastructure, but also the sporting infrastructure. And what came out of that was the importance of the strategic work that had taken place within the sporting organisations at both the national level and the regional level, but also from a council point of view in terms of development and maintaining and updating their facilities plans. What that means is that when the crisis and when the earthquakes occurred, they were able to mobilise and make some decisions quite quickly around where that funding went and what priorities might go. So if you go to the next slide, please. One of the projects out of the development were for the Nathunawai Regional Sports Hub. Now that was a large 32-hectare site, a green site that was identified by council, and it allowed those displaced sports. So in the previous images we saw there was athletics, there was hockey, there was tennis, rugby league came into that as well. It allowed us to really get together and be in the sandpit together, be in it and understand how the opportunities might be around shared facilities, how the opportunities might be around spending and prioritising money. The playing surfaces is a priority, but also the other built infrastructure to try and create that social hub and that social glue as we went through. If you go through to the next slide. The other one that we looked to develop was the Sandal Community Centre. And if you go to the next slide, what we've ended up being able to do was to really challenge the devastation of a community hall in partnership with a sports ground. So where that ended up with is almost through the crisis and the facilities development plan, strategically locating this community centre right in the middle of a couple of rugby fields. So that ended up complementing the sports centre that was already on the site, and what it allowed us to do was to really engage and open in that sharing of facilities, but also try and avoid that duplication around the existing sports centre and what might be provided in the community centre. Because you know what, there was within the community centre users, they were grandparents often in small communities like this, that their grandkids played rugby or they played sport. And so that really allowed us to try and challenge the current thinking of separation and enhance that ability for shared use and development. If you go to the next slide. So one of the projects which we're working on at the moment is Tūparakino Active Community Hub, and that's a project in regional New Zealand and Taranaki in New Plymouth, which is on the west coast. And what we've been able to do there is to embed further this idea of design thinking, but have it in a way that that community has been able to grab it and make it their own. So we've kind of talked about this idea of activation. You know, can we create the use of the hands, the 10 fingers being these 10 activation fingers, which can provide just a much more deeper spiritual connection than just a functional requirement. So that outlined a little bit of the opportunity that might be available in for us. The next slide, thanks. So clearly here in Australia, we've had the bushfires, we're currently experiencing the floods that have come through. And the question is, with all of this money that we have on our sports facilities, how can that be applied? You know, where is the priority on spending? And if I reflect back on that work that was done with the Canterbury earthquakes, we start to understand the importance of the strategic thinking, but also once the roofs have been replaced, covering the heads, we get infrastructure replaced, you know, and they are very, very important aspects. People have then started to understand, well, what are the other community strings that can pull us together and connect us as a community? And that's where the strategic planning and the strategic understanding of where the spend and the priorities end up going. It's a really tough task, but it's one that will be, you know, much longer term. Next slide, thanks. So the idea out of the work that we've been doing is to try and understand what is the future of our built environment and our community infrastructure. We've got this concept of third place. We're trying to evolve it into a new layer of thinking, third place thinking, and what are the components of our built structure and community infrastructure that can develop, and where are the opportunities within the site boundaries, but also beyond the site boundaries. It's not just about designing within the constraints of boundaries. And so what do we need to be able to do or try and understand and flesh out through consultation with the ingredients that we go through? So if you can just scan through a couple of, next slide, thanks. Next couple of slides. So we've got this idea of history and tradition, next slide, and then also culture. They are quite often, in trying to bring groups together, the really key aspects that people have questions about. We can understand need, but how is that history, tradition, culture brought forward into the facilities that we design? Next slide. One of the themes to design to third place thinking is this idea of scale and hierarchy and how do people understand it. So this diagram here just explains that at a national or international scale, a stadia scale event, how do we translate that idea of third place thinking down through the different scales of projects? And my thinking is that most people understand a residential, the intimacy and scale that surrounds that. So if us as designers, if we can understand and harness that narrative, that language, that feel, that intimacy and scale, and we can somehow replicate that or change that through based on the scale or hierarchy of facilities that we've got, then I think we'll have a really a much better and a much clearer opportunity to be able to have people have, say, a stadia as their glue, as their social hub. Next slide. So the question that we want to ask ourselves, we often ask ourselves is, in designing the world that we want, how can design transform and shape life? And ultimately, how can we reconnect and be inclusive with our communities? So the next slide we have is, in summary, I think as designers, we quite often get into this idea of object building, effectively a building that gets designed for an award and it gets loaded on the site without too much thinking around the surroundings and the boundary. We want to make sure that everyone has their say. Everybody has something worthwhile to say, and it's incredible that once you start getting out and engaging and having consultation process, there's all sorts of different users and also uses for our spaces that we design that we never would have thought would have been possible. So I think ourselves as designers, through architecture, we do want to be able to transfer and transform the environments that we do on a new basis of thinking and sharing. We certainly want to be able to design together to hear all of the inputs and the possible opportunities that can come forth. So in summary, if you can go to the last slide, the idea is we've got this idea, the third place concept. It's an old archaic concept. We want to be able to bring that forward. Can we reinterpret that and overlay a sense of the way that we design spaces in order to help people thrive through a crisis event, particularly that we've seen through Christchurch and now in Australia through the bushfires and the floods? We want to use that opportunity to enact some of the good strategic thinking and planning that needs to have happened to be able to allow us to develop these facilities for the community better. And it needs everybody in it together, not just as a designer or an architect. So that, I guess, is my call to action, is to let's design together in collaboration and an evolution, because it is a slow change. almost like a high performance athlete making subtle changes as they go through their lifetime as an athlete to peak at an event. It's making small incremental processes or steps, making subtle change and doing it together, and celebrating our wins every now and then. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Dion. We do have a little bit of time for some questions, and I do note that some people have kindly posted some questions in the chat. What I will do to start off with is ask for each of you to answer the question there around stakeholder engagement. All three of you spoke about the importance of engaging with stakeholders in the design process and being able to listen to their concerns or listen to their points of view and incorporating those into the design so that you get greater buy-in into the project. But somebody has posted in the chat, in fact it's David from Hornsby Council, has suggested there that often taking into account stakeholder responses means that costs of the project elevate. How do each of you actually manage that process? Barnaby, I might go to you first if that's all right.
No problem. Can you hear me, Karen?
Yeah, I sure can.
Oh, great. I was just searching for my little red live box. Well, the first response is I panic. It's a critical one when the budget goes up. But then really, like any process, it's quite a rational process that you go through. You know, you first establish what are the budget constraints? Have we allowed contingencies for overruns, for planning risks in the case of council and things like that? And if those are there to rely on, then we go to them. The alternative is actually just to look at it at a quite a pragmatic level, like what can we forego and how can we meet halfway? So in the case of one of my projects, like public domain upgrades, are we prepared to sacrifice, for example, mature planting in the rest of the landscape in order to provide some public amenity to meet council's needs? I think it's just always a matter of outlining what the opportunities are, establishing priorities, and then just workshopping them with the group. It may be an unsatisfactory example, but answer to the question, but really it's a case-by-case thing, and I think being transparent is really, really important.
Great, thanks. Belinda, how would you manage it, or how do you manage it, I should say?
I would tend to agree with a lot of what Barnaby says. I mean, obviously, you can't deliver everything for every individual on a project, and a lot of the time I think there is a real buy-in to process that's needed through each design phase, and a really clear communication around how those items are being addressed and the compromises that are being made along the journey with each of the stakeholders, but also with the client. And I think that it is very intrinsic that is owned by both the design team as an objective to try and solve and to come up with options and to test where those opportunities could take the project. But I also believe that it's very much about the client effectively kind of owning that process too, and really feeling like that they themselves can communicate and actually also connect with their users and provide messaging around how we arrive at certain solutions through testing and understanding options, and then building a solution that actually provides, I suppose, a kind of intricate understanding of how all those users come together, and that we create the most universal approach to the design without compromising overarching principles to the project. And I think that is really key all the way through the design process. So there's the briefing process, and then there's a consolidation, and then there's effectively how you take that forward in terms of developing ideas and exploring those and looking at innovations, and then pushing that through into concepts and then into refined responses. So it's iterative, but I think it also has to be well communicated, and then effectively also bringing those stakeholders along on the journey and them understanding the reasons why things potentially aren't all as they want them, but they are in a consensus around an opinion that they can actually be comfortable with the solution and have bought into the solution.
Great, thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, so Dion, I might go to you with the question that's actually posted at the start of the chat there. You touched on a number of sort of natural disasters in your presentation, and of course we've recently experienced the floods here, particularly in southeast Queensland and in New South Wales. I suspect that you would believe that sport facilities, sport infrastructure do also play a role in terms of evacuation or emergency centres in those times of crisis. How would you integrate that type of a role into a design process, and what kind of consultation or community engagement would you do to ensure that that's the case?
Yeah, I think to use the example, so the Dunsandel Community Centre that was set up as a civil defence centre in our design process, and so part of that was going back to that strategic idea or thinking about where those centres might sit. It also means that channeling the idea of shared resources and facilities, and where in the rebuild phase is the best place to be able to locate these centres. It gives us an opportunity to be able to look through a network plan potentially and understand where that sits. And to the points earlier, it's around, you know, that messaging in your project structure or group that can carry those messages through. So, you know, if you end up with a facility manager, for example, they've been part of that decision-making process. So when people open the door and they come in and they ask a question, at least there's some thread of information and background about how you arrived at a process.
Yeah, great, thank you. Look, I am really conscious of time and that we've got 2 more presenters to go. Thank you everybody who has posted your questions in the chat. We might see if we can tease out a bit of a response from our presenters today and maybe include that in some of our documentation that will circulate after the presentation so that people don't feel like their questions have gone unanswered. But thank you for everybody who has shared their questions. And of course, thank you to Belinda, Barnaby and Dion for showing us today your passion for your work, but also your experience and your expertise, and for being so generous and sharing your examples with everybody today. So thank you very much. And just a reminder for everybody who is on the call today that we are actually recording the session. So please do not feel like you need to frantically take notes down. You can go back and rewatch this session at your leisure. Now let's move on to the second part of today. And the second part is that we are fortunate to have 2 fabulous and experienced presenters and experts in the field of stakeholder engagement. And our first presenter is Turkan Aksoy. Turkan's efforts are centred on diverse communities encompassing mental health, employment and social cohesion, particularly around inclusion and equity. As Welcoming Cities Coordinator, Turkan is currently supporting local councils throughout New South Wales. Turkan works with all tiers of government, but believes local government is best placed to understand the complexity and diversity of their communities and facilitate a whole of community approach. Welcoming Cities works with local governments and their communities in the advancement of Australia as a welcoming, prosperous, I should say, and cohesive nation. So thank you so much for joining us today, Turkan, and I'll hand over to you.
Merhaba, adım Türkan. Hoş bulduk. My name is Turkan. I'd like to let you know that I'm connecting you from Darkinjin country. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and thank elders and community for care of people, culture and country. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the various different people who are on this link up, who carry language, who carry culture, who also support ancestral knowledge and ancestral stories. So I would like to acknowledge you. My pronouns are they, them, and I also identify as neurodiverse. This is National Neurodiversity Week, which is great, acknowledging that we all perceive things in various different ways. It's also International Day to Eliminate Racial Discrimination, which we call Harmony Day here in Australia, and International Day of Happiness, which is a human right, I've been told. But sometimes we really have challenged our notion of happiness during COVID, floods, fires, it just keeps coming, but gratitude seems to centre us and ground us in so many ways. I'd like to also acknowledge those who are celebrating Happy Holi and Navruz Bayramınız kutlu olsun, Happy Navruz for your new year as well. I'm someone who's very committed to trauma-informed practices. I want to make sure that psychological and cultural safety is always looked after, and I'm committed to that. If anything I share is triggering in any way or form, please utilise your own granting mechanisms. If you do need some help, please reach out. I'm happy to hand back, and I'm always very contactable if you need a chat or just a smiley emoji. Just let me know what you need. Wow, Belinda, Wulgoga complex, sports complex. I so want to visit. It looked amazing. Obviously, the consultations and the engagements were very authentic. It was very real, because I particularly like the squiggly lines when you had the engagement image, because it is a back and forth process, right? There was a lot of, yeah, we're there, and no, we're not yet there yet, and a lot more conversations to make sure that we are bringing people along this journey with us. So next slide, if possible. So I am the New South Wales Coordinator for Welcoming Cities. I'm really in a privileged space to be supporting councils with their inclusion and diversity journey. Some of the larger councils that are members of Welcoming Cities, like our City of Sydney, Blacktown, Canterbury Bankstown, Liverpool, Waverley, Inner West, just to name a few. But we also support regional councils like Wulgoga, Temora and Leeton. And each of them have their own nuances, their own issues, their own priorities around how they choose and wish to connect with diverse cohorts. Some are really advanced in that space, and some are still learning and tracking along a journey where they are still trying to understand what it means to them and their 10-year projections and future projections as well. I'm very much in supporting local councils to develop a benchmark in leading policy and practices. We have this thing called Welcoming City Standards, and spaces and places is one of those priorities. So we look at 6 priorities, and spaces and places is something that we'd like to engage with our local governments and our stakeholder peaks and say, hey, we need to really prioritise on what this actually means in regards to making sure that when we are creating and developing cities and upgrading our facilities, how we're making sure that that connection to community is always there and always viable. I have always been in a privileged space to be able to connect to First Nations elders, and I really want to do a massive shout out to Uncle Harry, Auntie Lynn, Auntie Maggie, Auntie Nolene, who have really helped me as a migrant to this country to understand what spaces and places and connection actually means. I'm from a Turkish ancestry. My ancestry only goes back 9,000 years. Uncle Harry's, Auntie Lynn's ancestry goes back 60,000 plus years, and it's not been severed until colonialisation happened here in Australia. I'm very tuned into the fact that I am listening constantly, learning constantly, and adapting my own practices and connections to make sure that First Nations narrative is at the head of what I do and what I commit my energy and resources to. Hence why I have this notion of trust building and relationships. Trust is something that is felt. It is something that takes a lot of time. I'm very mindful that many of you are going to these projects and there's usually time frames. There's usually budgets, there's usually little stages you have to go through and make sure you process to the next stage. That is not always cohesive to diverse communities, particularly First Nations people, where connection and gathering consent and permission sometimes takes a lot of time, a lot of unpacking, a lot of discussions, not just with each other, but to country and to spirits. So we need to be really mindful that we are connecting to people on very unique ways, and we will need to make sure respect is always at the forefront of that. I'm not quite sure why my texts have gone a little bit weird on both sides. That is a bit weird, but it's all about looking at customized engagement. So when you see that target with the arrow, that actually should be saying customized engagement, but it's not saying that on my side, so I'm not quite sure. Customized engagement means making sure that we don't use one level of communication and use it with every single community cohort. We live in a country where we have over 200 language groups, and that's not even capturing the Aboriginal language groups, our First Nations language groups, which is far more complex and really sophisticated. So when we are looking at what we want to do about targeted engagement, we want to make sure that there is relationship building done with those groups. Belinda, you spoke beautifully about identifying the profile of your community, how you connected with the seed community and making sure that you understood what they needed, what they wanted. That is a wonderful way to be able to say, hey, I want to create a relationship with you so I can do my job better and make sure that the resources and the facilities that I'm contributing my time and energy to is embraced. It's actually appreciated and it's valued. I've seen in local government work that I have done myself where facilities have gone up and literally within weeks they get spray painted, they get rejected by community if it's not done right. We have seen that, and maintenance on those facilities start to deteriorate, and it makes our areas look really loud and proud that there was no connection, there was no consultation, there was no relationships with the communities that we are serving and supporting. And then I would like to go on about the shared journey. As you know, I started off my presentation with language. So language is something that I am taking ownership and reclaiming. Many migrants and also for First Nations people, language was stripped away from them. It was severed. I remember being told not to speak Turkish in my classrooms. And yet now I'm trying to reclaim that. I'm utilising these conversations to make sure that I am making these journeys that I've had through my ancestral knowledge a part of my decision making, a part of my practice today. A lot of diverse communities are connected to ancestral connections. Understanding that we are not always able to communicate with people who have these understandings in English is something we want to really get our heads around. English and translating English to Arabic, Vietnamese, Cantonese is never going to be enough. It's not about the translations, it's about the connections. So when you are connecting with diverse communities, I really encourage you to hear their stories and see where you fit in those stories. So that way, when your facilities and your upgrades are done, that the energy that you've put in, and I am very aware of the time and the sweat that goes into some of these really large projects, you want to make sure that they are taken care of and there's custodial ownership of that by community, that there is care and that they add on to that joint story and joint sharing. Next slide, please. Before I talk about understanding equity, again, I'm not quite sure why my texts have gone all weird. We have to, I would like to just maybe share Punchbowl Mosque. If anyone would like to Google Punchbowl Mosque, I haven't been there, but I know that when I look at these images, it really resonates to me as a Turkish woman coming from a Muslim background. I can see the care of that's been placed on space, on the images that are being used, the color tones that have been used. Just by looking at, I'm like, I'm going to be welcomed into that space. So I already have that notion of trust that it's already being taken up by the consultation phase, that people were taken along that journey as things were being constructed. I believe Infinity Constructions put that building together. And also when it was launched, that people embraced it, because I remember being part of Lakemba, Punchbowl, Bankside, and people really speaking quite highly of this beautiful facility that was created for them to be able to come and engage with their faith. It's a wonderful facility. I really encourage you to have a look at it. Understanding equity. So we have words such as diversity, equity, and hopefully we get to this inclusion space. Diversity is really where we all differ in unique ways, whether we are different from the kind of faiths we belong to, our abilities and our access issues, or abilities to be able to engage and interject our voices. Also in the unique ways we identify. All of these things are part of the way we differ, but all of those things really need to be looked at in a very real way. Reading about someone with a disability, I live with dyslexia, you know, sending me content in written forms is really going to shut me down. I'm not going to be able to really engage. But if you utilize things such as videos, images, maps, where I can really walk with you along that journey, it's going to help me be able to say, hey, yes, I hear what you're doing. I really want to support what you're doing, and I'm connected and committed for what you want to establish and create. So it's really, really important to try, if possible, to engage with community cohorts that are represented in these groups and create real tangible relationships. When you create these real tangible relationships, you then start to see things that they might need to access. Things like a prayer room, places where you might have to wash hands and feet, making sure that the signage is maybe multicolored, or things around fauna flora sovereignty. You know, are insects going to be able to go past here? Is possums are going to be able to go past that tree? It's really, really important to be able to start seeing the world. And Dion, you said that beautifully, designing together, working at this together. And that's something that I really, really want to take on, about making sure that we are collective in creating these wonderful spaces and places. And inclusion, once you have those diversity and equity abilities, inclusion is where we want to get to. We want to make sure that there's empowerment in voices, that there's decisions that are being made where people are not being left behind. So many times I have seen, you know, Aboriginal assessments come my way and people ticking boxes and saying, yep, there's nothing in there, it's all fine. And elders coming back to me going, no, there's sacred trees there, what's going on? So it's really, really important that we make sure, especially our First Nations protection and preservation is done. It's the oldest living civilization on the planet. There is a notion that they hold so much knowledge that we are not even aware of. Protecting those is going to be protecting ourselves, to be honest. I want to also just really unpack a little bit about the notion that inclusion is, it's not finite. We are learning about ways to include others as we grow, as we create safe spaces where people are able to disclose what it means to be part of a community or belong to a community. We know better, we do better. So it's really, really important to go, I have done this 4-hour training, I'm good, I'm happy to start working on this space. It is a lifelong journey. I'm a migrant to this country. I've been lucky enough to work with First Nations people for the last 12 years or so, and still I'm like this much in that space of that deep learning. Really commit to your own journey about deep learning and work out how these apply to your own value systems and the work that you do as a practitioner. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, here I have started to talk a bit about First Nations people, and I'm not a First Nations people, so I'm not going to talk about it. I really, really encourage you to go back to the last forum and have a look at what Michael Mossman, Kuku Yalanji man spoke about connection to country. It was beautiful, honestly, beautiful. But what I can say as a migrant to this country, we respect First Nations people on such a high standard. We value that they call each other uncles, aunties, they have place. There is roles within our community about looking after community as a collective. Communal healing places, spaces, that's something that resonates with migrant communities really, really profoundly. I really encourage that if you are connected with diverse communities, particularly migrant people from refugee backgrounds, that First Nations are people be at the forefront and centre of this, because once that trust is already established, there's trust in the ability for you to be able to deliver projects that are based on connection. Personally invest. This is something it's a bit sensitive topic because it's really about understanding colonisation, anti-racism. This is language that I'm just going to introduce because it's something you might want to unpack a little bit more. There's some amazing organisations such as Democracy in Colour, Hue, Colour of Conversation. They do some really brilliant work about understanding where justice can be placed in spaces and places as well, in how we buildings and spaces that are created, which people are able to feel like home. Where can they connect to? Can they see a bit of themselves? I worked in the Canterbury Bankstown area for 12 years, almost 12 years. And when you come out of the train at Bankstown train station, can you see that there's First Nations people there? Visually see it. So we need to be really mindful about the fact that are we adding to inclusion and equity and justice for all, or are we just doing the same, expecting people to just conform, accept, and just, you know, feel that notion that they are othered or they feel they sit on the outside. So there is a bunch of resources around support, training and information about that. feel free to go onto my LinkedIn. I post a lot of this information out there, links out there if you want to expand some of your space about personally investing. I find that when you are broadening your scope of understanding about people, you are able to then interject that into your own work. You'll be able to see it in the way you design, the way you consult, the procurement you pick up, like who are you hiring for these roles, where they're coming from, have you chosen First Nations providers over other providers, are you part of the Reconciliation Action Plan deliverables? So you get to work out that every aspect of your life is either supporting inclusion or holding on to non-inclusion. So think about the way you take on your own growth and knowledge in how you implement spaces and design. Finding key gatekeepers. This is something that really has helped my own professional journey. You don't have to know everybody in the space, but knowing key people in the space who have trust, who have relationships with the cohorts that you work with is a fantastic way in. Once you gain trust of the gatekeepers, I refer to them as the gatekeepers because they can literally pick up the phone, call a couple of numbers, and wow, there's like 100 people at a consultation that you would not have engaged if you had just put it on your website or if you had just sent an email out. They are very good at making sure that information is sent and disseminated appropriately. I found that in the last 2 years throughout COVID, that people and who we identify as our gatekeepers have really changed a lot. It's really important to go back and work out who's actually in the space sharing information. I find that especially in the anti-racism space, as people are working out impacts of microaggression, some people are clicking out, they're checking out, they're opting out because it's very overwhelming. It has impacted them on a personal level and with their families and with their lives. So it's really important to have a look around to see who are our gatekeepers, what ways they are communicating. Like WhatsApp has been amazing during this whole community engaged with councils, particularly around health regulations and restrictions that were happening. Facebook, Insta, WeChat, people are communicating in various different forms. Utilize them. Go where they're communicating, where they're connecting. Next slide, please. Sorry.
Khan, just before you continue on, I am conscious of time there for everybody. I do want to no worries. I do want to reassure everybody that today's session is being recorded and it will be available on our website. So please stay on the call if you can, because we do have Sarah coming up, who will be fantastic in sharing some of her insights as well. But for those of you that do have to leave, please be aware that there will be a recording available on our website that you can stay tuned or listen back into. So back over to you, Turkan. Sorry for the interruption.
All good. I've got some logos there of the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs, the Giants, the Wanderers. Some of these organisations have been fantastic in engaging with communities, not just when they have an event coming up. The same people who work in these organisations have been there during the floods. They've been there during the COVID lockdowns. They are incredible connectors, particularly the bilingual workers. They are amazing at making sure that their relationship with community is real and it's very authentic. Next slide. I'm going to make it quick so we get to Sarah. I just want to again reiterate my points about connecting to First Nations narrative, growing with your project, but beyond your project as well, and having shared stories. Diversity offices at local governments are great connection points where you can connect to people from seniors, youth groups, inclusion and diversity networks and interagencies as well. They can access and support you and link you up with many gatekeepers as well in this space. Welcoming Cities have actually created a Welcoming Cities Inclusion Communication Toolkit. I have placed the link in there for you. Feel free to look through it. It gives you, especially if you're new into this space, really some foundations where you can grow some of your knowledge and skill sets from. Next page, please. Thank you. Again, Teshakura Dedim. I'm all about making sure that people feel welcome and they have a sense and belonging, and that they are echoing what Dion said, let's design together. So I'll finish off there.
Thank you so much, Turkan, and thank you so much for your insights again, particularly and your expertise around the inclusion space. Look, we will now move on to our next presenter, Sarah Riley. So please make Sarah feel very welcome. And also, like I just mentioned previously, we are recording today's session. We do know we're going a little bit over time, but at the same time, we don't want you to miss out on some of this incredible experience and expertise that's being provided to you today. Look, Sarah is a founder and director of Cred Consulting, an award-winning consultancy striving to collaborate to create communities, places and cities that are connected, that are equitable and that are regenerative. I can't say that word. Sarah's passion for people and places led her to find Cred, and she has created a team of community champions with the expertise and experience to support government, not-for-profit and private industry to plan for communities and spaces from the site and place to the city and state scale. Sarah has worked from major and significant projects to hands-on activations with communities, bringing her over 20 years of experience, emotional intelligence and subject matter expertise to every role. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much. And anyone that knows me knows that I can talk fast and give a message quickly. So I appreciate everyone who stayed on the line. And thanks so much to the previous speakers and their insights and passion around community-led design and Turkin for emphasising the need to listen and build trust. And now I'm going to drill down a little bit, give an overview of the importance of thinking outside our own experience when designing and engaging, and some really quick run through some tactical and immersive engagement tools that can help rebalance that power between specialists like myself and the communities of interest or our future users. And we think about how we can welcome communities into the design process, but also deliver welcoming facilities. And one of the things we hear a lot from communities, particularly more disadvantaged communities, is how some of the facilities that we're delivering now, they don't feel comfortable going into because they're so spectacular. So thinking about that idea of welcoming, and we just heard from welcoming cities. So next slide, please. Just really quickly acknowledgement of country, and I acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Gadigal people, and I pay my respect to the traditional owners, ancestors and elders past and present. Might go to the next slide. Just want to start off with saying that we're not all the same and we don't all need the same things. We know that we have an incredibly diverse population in New South Wales, people with disabilities, many of us with invisible disabilities, really high proportion of people born overseas and from non-English speaking backgrounds, and 83% of our overseas born populations live in our capital cities. So that's a really big statistics, and that's growing out in our, particularly our southwest and Sydney areas. We've got a really increasing number of people who identify as gender diverse as well. So while we talk about the needs of women and girls, we also need to think about those the real emergence of in our transgender and gender diverse community as well. High proportion of older people and an increasing number of older people, but also 23% of us are under 24. And what that means is that not everyone can get to places the same way. They don't have the same power in their own lives either. So we need to think about those things. 10% of us don't have a car, and where I live in Darlinghurst, 50% of people don't have a car. So not everyone's driving and parking to these facilities either. So thinking about those different things, 51% of us are women, and 18% of us are low-income households, which means there are real issues around access. And I also just want to add, just listening to everyone today, that it's not just about our personal demographics, but it's also about our place experience that we need to think about now when designing. And we know that some communities are way more affected by heat or floods, and Dion spoke about that third place thinking. For example, we know that in Blacktown LGA, the council is planning for its social infrastructure, its sports infrastructure to basically become heat refuges. You know, they are in a heat emergency, and in the future, these spaces are not just going to be places for sport or for recreation. They're going to be places actually to escape the heat or to go to in emergencies. And we know that Sydney Olympic Park facilities were recently used as the mass vaccination centres during the last lockdown. So really think about that adaptability and that future proofing and what our communities are going to need and how different communities are more affected by heat and floods and fires and other impacts of climate. Next slide, please. So who are we designing for anyway? Let's ask ourselves that question. Are we designing for this guy, this healthy, fit, Anglo-Saxon, fabulous looking person with wonderful hair, or are we thinking about designing for all these people, because that's the reality of our communities, that's the reality of our users? We're thinking about communities who play badminton and table tennis. We're thinking about older communities who might be doing Tai Chi or need to dance. We're thinking about little children with disabilities, little girls from different cultures who just want to play cricket in an informal way. And we're thinking about all those different people. We're not just thinking about these able-bodied, fit and healthy sports people when we are delivering sports and recreation facilities. Next slide, please. And if we don't think about that, this is what we end up with. If we don't think about our users and we don't engage them in the design experience, we can end up with some really unfortunate outcomes that don't really fit the needs. So we know that the Women's Network logo recently was a real example of how not kind of thinking about our user and not thinking about their experience can end up with a poor outcome, and can also, create lots of risks and financial implications for a project getting over the line, which can be a real barrier at the end as well. Next slide, please. So communities are our best friends for amazing design outcomes, and it's really important to think about them that way, and they really are subject matter experts in their own lives. Nobody knows a local site, a facility, a place better than a person that uses it or will use it. Not everyone thinks, moves, plays, or looks like me or you. And so it's really important to research, observe and talk to communities and users upfront to understand who are they now, how might they change in the future, what is their experience, and how can I make it easy for them to participate? What are they interested in doing? What barriers do they face? What do they need to thrive? And what can they teach me? I mean, all of us practitioners today have talked about the lessons we can have, the learnings that we have along these journeys, and communities and all the different people can teach us different things. And I really love this image down in Darling Harbour of the provision of mirrors along the side of the entertainment precinct, which is completely activated by Korean kids who do K-pop dance practice down there. Activate that space with a simple intervention of mirrors by thinking about those different user groups that can make these really incredible transformative spaces. Next slide, please. I've heard this before many times. If I want a horse, I'm going to end up with a donkey if I talk to communities. And it's that attitude that communities really don't understand design. Maybe they don't, but if we provide the tools and the information for those communities, they can engage in a design process in a much more useful and beneficial way for everyone. We know that better research is going to inform design. It can reduce risk and get you quicker approvals. Talking to communities and thinking that they might just know something can really make you feel great inside. It can really make you feel like a better person. They can deliver nuanced knowledge and insights and a whole new way of thinking about things, creating social equity and cohesion, which is absolutely at the core of our resilience planning for our future communities. And we know that they can be friends and partners and advocates for success. And I think that's a really important lesson. If you can bring those communities and those future users along the journey, they will be your best friends when it gets to the approval stage or when you have to go and present those design ideas. Next slide, please. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm racing through this. So I'm going to just show you a few fun tools that we used really quickly. Make it an equal playing field. Knowledge is power. Don't just go into a community and say, what do you need? Who knows? I don't know what I need half the time, but if you're able to provide ideas that can generate conversation and thinking, if you can play fun games, so on the right, this is an activity called Hot or Not, where we show different types of outcomes and people can vote whether they like it or don't like it super fast, or we'd give them trends so that people can understand the changes and the emergence in design and get them then to collaborate and discuss about those different trends and how they feel about them. Next slide, please. Get out of your space into someone else's. Sitting in a meeting room is really not a great way to design. Get into the space, go down there with the community, give them opportunities to engage and vote. The incidental engagement is really, really important. And get down to really engage at the level of the community in their own space. Next slide, please. This is an approach that we use a lot, and I think it's a really, really important approach. And we always know that there's competing needs and ideas from different stakeholders, including within those communities of interest within a community. This can be really challenging, but one of the things we do now is we identify at the beginning kind of personas or experiences, and we then ask people to think in the mind of that person or that persona or that experience to get them out of their own need, to get them out of their own kind of individualistic thinking and think about how different people who experience places differently might need a different design outcome. Next slide, please. We can also go alongside. So this means, again, it's getting into people's places, but Going for walks with people is amazing. I don't know if any of you have children, but there's no way to have a conversation with your son than going for a walk while they walk alongside you and talk about all the things they're experiencing, feeling and seeing. If you get into a place with people, if you walk around, people with, or not even walk, people with disabilities, in a wheelchair, really immerse yourself in their experience as you go around these spaces and understand the different challenges, barriers or opportunities that you just can't understand when you come from a perspective like myself, for example. Next slide, please. And break down the barriers. Like Turkan talked about, not everybody can engage in the same way. Not everyone is comfortable communicating in the same way. So think about different tools you can use to give different kinds of people an opportunity to participate. Just asking questions, writing on a whiteboard, those sorts of things. It's just not easy. People don't have confidence a lot of the time either. So create tactile ways to engage, little things that they can hold up to communicate, physical experience, physical ways that people can demonstrate what they need or their ideas. And next slide, please. And I'm finished. So really 3 tips for successful user-led design outcomes. Really get to know your community, or as I'll say, your communities of interest, and keep them in the design journey from the very beginning to the design end. They can be your best friends, not your biggest problem. Provide multiple points and multiple ways to engage throughout and different ways to engage, and get out of your space and into the space or into the headspace of other communities. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and for getting through all of those important messages in such a succinct and small amount of time. And also thank you to Turkan for your presentation as well. And I know that we do have a number of questions there posted in the chat. Unfortunately, we won't have time to answer those questions, but like I mentioned earlier, we will put those questions to all of our presenters today and see if they can provide us with answers that we can then publish for you, or at least distribute as part of the information that will come out of today's sessions. Look, we hope you've enjoyed today's seminar on design thinking. It's the second in a series of discussions within the Inclusion and Innovation Forum series. The seminars will continue to be hosted virtually and will take place on a monthly basis. And an invitation to the next forum will be sent to all of today's attendees within the next week or so. This series has been designed to be thought-provoking, to share learnings, and for the audience to get some tips from experts in their respective fields. The office is thinking, though, about providing a deeper dive into some of the topics covered in this series in the future, as well as organising a series of seminars, roundtable, and other discussions later in the year on the sports and active recreation sector's sustainability and adaptability to issues of climate change. The next forum is on Design for Women and Girls and is on Wednesday, the 23rd of April. In this forum, we look forward to hearing directly from female athletes, some female officials and also administrators. Diversity in design will once again be the focus of the discussion, and the panelists will apply a gender lens to what they have experienced and will share stories and insights into what a well-designed and operating inclusive facility looks and feels like. Presenters will share local community success stories, share stories of leading change in facility design, share innovative approaches, and do some blue sky design thinking, as well as recognise what we have learned so far. Look, thank you again for being part of today's audience. The office will be sending all participants a link to today's forum recording, as well as further information, including responses to any unanswered questions. Please share the web-based recordings and further information with colleagues and friends. Also, I really do want to give a heartfelt thank you to all of our presenters today, Belinda, Barnaby, Dion, Turkan and Sarah. Thank you for being so generous with your time and your expertise. Now, please, everybody, enjoy the rest of the day and don't forget to put a placeholder in the diary for Forum 3, which is Designing for Women and Girls on Wednesday, the 27th of April at 11 o'clock until 12:30. We'll say ish. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.